跟中国开始座谈。
Ladies and gentlemen, today's forum will begin in about 2 minutes. Please kindly take your seats and please remember to put your mobile phone on silent or on vibrate mode. Thank you for your cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engagement Forum with 35th TWNIC IP Open Policy Meeting. Today's forum is jointly organized by the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN, and Taiwan Network Information Center, TWNIC, with the support from National Communications Commission, NCC. This forum provides a platform for different stakeholders to explore the policy, technology, and interoperation in the network. To kick off today's forum, we are very honored to invite Dr. Vint Cerf, father of the Internet, to deliver his opening remarks for us. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Vint Cerf.
Chief Internet Evangelist at Google. I wish I could join you at the Taiwan NIC and ICANN meetings, but in these days of no travel, that's not going to work. So you'll have to put up with a kind of virtual greeting. But I do want to thank you and tell you how important it is for the work that you're doing to be done. We know that the proper management of unique identifiers of the Internet, main names and the Internet addresses, are vital to the successful functioning of the Internet. And so working together to sort out issues arising, problems in policy, and things of that kind that typically come up in the ICANN context are really important. And so your time and energy are so much appreciated by all of us who hope for a continued and successful expansion of the Internet, its access and its utility. As you must know, Internet is still less than 100% deployed around the world, and there are many, many issues arising right now in the use of this platform. So although many of those issues are outside of the ambit of ICANN's focus of attention, I'm sure that many of you will be thinking about that and trying to figure out how to make the internet a safer and more effective place in which to work. So again, let me thank you for your time and energy. I look forward to a day when we can actually see each other face to face, but in the meantime, maybe I'll see you on the net.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sir, for your remarks. And next, please welcome Dr. Wei Zhong Deng, Commissioner at National Communications Commission, NCC, to say a few words. Ladies and gentlemen, let us put our hands together to welcome Dr. Deng.
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank our friend from the international internet community, ICANN, TWNIC, and other internet organizations to join us at the second ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engage Forum and the 35th TWNIC Open Policy Meeting today. With the speakers' abundant experience and understandings on different aspects of the internet development, this forum will be a great opportunity for Taiwan community members to understand and current trends and development of the global internet better. We all know that ICANN is a non-profit organization to promote a secure and stable internet through the multi-stakeholder model, where cooperating the domain name system, IP addresses allocation, and maintaining the root servers by coordinating the work with the other internet communities. ICANN and the internet communities can work together to ensure the resiliency for secure, better, and stable internet. Taiwan Network Information Center, aka TWNIC, serves the same purposes in Taiwan. Managing the .TW/CC/TLD, IP addresses allocation, root server operation, and TW/CC operation. Cooperating with the stakeholders from ISPs, businesses, government, and organizations, keeping all the users in Taiwan to access the internet without obstacle, and has become an essential task in the age of the internet. For keeping the internet secure and stable, TWNIC and ICANN APAC are also working together to establish a platform bringing the stakeholders in Taiwan and the international internet community together, allowing everyone to exchange opinions freely. The forum also provides the Taiwan community members a great opportunity to know the current trends and developments, promoting the understanding of the technological advancement, and to encourage discussion and debate to the internet policy and reach the consensus in the end. As a part of the thriving internet ecosystem, NCC, National Communications Committee, has also been a dedicated stakeholder on Taiwan's internet development. We focus on the network communication protocols, information security, and the overall policy development. NCC has been working with other stakeholders together to keep advancing forward with the Taiwanese people. NCC will continue working with relevant stakeholders and adapt to the needs as the direction for future improvements. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for joining with me today's event and wish the success of the second ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engagement Forum and the 35th TWNIC Open Policy Meeting. By taking each step ahead, we will be able to get closer to the realization of one world, one internet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deng. Dr. Deng, please take your seats. And thank you once again for Dr. Deng's remarks. Thank you. Please take your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Ms. Danielle Andrews, Economic Section Chief at the American Institute in Taiwan. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Andrews for her remarks.
念稿，不好意思。National Communications Commission Commissioner Tang, TWNIC Chairman Lee, TWNIC CEO Huang, ICANN Board Member Maimura, APNIC Director General Wilson, distinguished guests, 早安。我是安田，美国在台县。
My name is Samuel Andrews, Economic Section Chief of the AIT.
Pleasure to help open the second ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engagement Forum and, as mentioned, the 35th TWNIC IP Open Policy Meeting. It's also an honor to speak on the very same stage as fellow American and founding father of the internet, Vint Cerf. I'm super excited. As the internet evolves and new network technologies blur the line between the physical world and the virtual, now's the time for, as we, as multi-stakeholder community, take a stock and of all the rising challenges of the global internet. What's that mean? Together, we must decide how we can ensure emerging technologies are governed to reflect our shared values and to protect data, privacy, and human rights. In looking at the schedule of topics for today and tomorrow, it strikes me that many of these are at the forefront of US foreign policy. Whether it's the challenges posed by cybersecurity and cyber norms, the regulation of social media, or considering how to adapt to the accelerated pace of digital transformation. These are all issues that the United States experts and policymakers all deal with and grapple with on a daily basis. Indeed, the struggle to maintain an open internet is one in which victory cannot be taken for granted. The United States is dedicated to preserving an open internet, and the Biden administration has prioritized its efforts through the creation of a new directorate that's especially dedicated to this in the National Security Council. It focuses on the crucial nexus between technology and national security. We believe that the best policy is made when experts are at the table and can understand and quickly react to the latest trends in technology. In these efforts, we are proud to stand with Taiwan, a truly reliable partner, to publicly proclaim our shared values and close cooperation to ensure that the internet remains a free, democratic, global platform. As our AIT Director Christensen often remarks, we describe the US-Taiwan partnership with the phrase, real friends will progress. 真朋友,正进展. Our mutual support of democratic governance of the internet perfectly illustrates this idea. In closing, I'd like to congratulate Taiwan for its championship of an open democratic internet that is free for the entire world. We look forward to continued collaboration over the years to come. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Andrews, for your remarks. Ms. Andrews, please take your seat. Thank you for your remarks. Our next speaker is Mr. Akinori Maimura, Board Director at ICANN. He is joining us online today, so ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Maimura.
Engagement Forum. And then please accept my heartfelt Huang in Tacha for everyone. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, TWNIC, for being our co-host, especially my old and good friend, Kenny Huang, who is the CEO of the TWNIC, and Anthony Lee, TWNIC's Director for the International Affairs and the Public Relationship. And we have quite years of the constant partnership. And then I'm really happy to bring this event again to, this year on the top of the over the years collaboration between us. TWNIC is the really active participant to the ICANN community, and TWNIC is one of the CCTLD managers who participate in the DAAR, a domain name abuse activity reporting program, which is mainly applied for the GTLD and then CCTLD as a branch basis. And then the TWNIC is the quite one of the biggest champion for the IDN, internationalized domain names, and then further working for the promoting universal acceptance of the IDNs. So it is helping the ICANN's mandate to spread out to the world, and then for the TWNIC to expand it to reach out to the Taiwanese internet communities. So this area, the security, this area of the security, for example, the DAAR is for the domain name security, and then the IDN is for the evolution of the internet identifier system. They are all important for the global internet community, and then we are quite grateful for the TWNIC's collaboration with us for the working together. As we all know that we are now suffering from the COVID-19, and then last year and this year we only can do this forum is online. But I'm really glad to be able to resume this year, and then expanding, especially this time, it is expanded to include the TWNIC's IP Open Policy Forum, which is the 35th, and then moreover, including the Paul Wilson, my old good friend, the Director General of APAC-TWNIC, for joining the program coordination for this event. Thank you very much, Paul, for this. So from the ICANN side, we will provide to reach out to the Taiwanese community with the agenda of the DNSSEC security extension, and then touching on the area of the DNS over HTTPS for addressing the domain name abuse. And then we will also share the implementation of the universal acceptance, which aims to help connect the next billion of the internet users in their own languages and scripts. So we will discuss how you can be the part of the multi-stakeholder community of ICANN to ensure voices of your region continue to be heard in important matters regarding everyone's use of the internet. So cybersecurity is the responsibility for all internet users, and then which is our shared commitment. And then ICANN and the TWNIC is here to reach out to the internet multi-stakeholders to work together to reinforce the security, stability, and the resiliency of the internet to evolve the internet for the future. So please join us for such a great endeavor to advance the internet. Last but not least, I'd like to thank you very much for the participation of our dear forum participants, and then hope you enjoy in this really the great engagement event. And then thank you very much for all. 谢谢.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maimura, for your remarks and for joining us today online. Our next speaker is Mr. Paul Wilson, Director General of APAC-TWNIC. He is also joining us online today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Paul Wilson.
Thank you very much. It really is an honor to be here virtually to join the second ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engagement Forum. I attended the first event in 2019 and gave a presentation then about RPKI and the next generation registry that APAC-TWNIC is developing along with NIR such as TWNIC. It seems like a lot has happened since then in the last 2 years. On the one hand, COVID has changed a lot of things, but on the other hand, RPKI, which I spoke about, is growing massively in that time, and it shows that life is going on very actively in spite of all the challenges. I am really sorry not to be there with you in person this time, but I can see that as usual in anything that TWNIC does, and I want to recognise this, there's a professional dedication behind this event in that it's being run as a hybrid event during the pandemic, and thanks very much for your efforts on that. It's really great to see such an audience there in Taipei, and so I want to recognise that. Thank you all for being here and supporting TWNIC, and to also recognise the presence, as usual, of the NCC in Dr. Wei Chung Dung with his very interesting and helpful speech, not to mention the other guests internationally, including my old friend Akinori. Not only that, but also, as usual with TWNIC, there's a high quality of content and speakers here. And I think it's obvious that the aim of this joint event is to generate and nurture the local community in Taiwan to engage with the wider ecosystem. And I think the program shows a lot of collaboration and participation towards that end from local and regional and international participants. So really, congratulations on that. Something to note also is that this is the 35th OPM organised by TWNIC. And just a couple of words about that. The OPMs, the Open Policy Meetings, are very important within the APAC-TWNIC and NIR framework, part of the bottom-up process that's essential in the development of policies within the RIR system. And I think the ethic and the point of the OPMs is really to represent and to show that RIRs act as servants, not as masters of this community. I think TWNIC, with its incredible professionalism and service ethic, really embodies that. And so to see the OPM happening so reliably over many years in Taiwan is really fantastic at that local level, and it's a huge credit to TWNIC. These community events are not only about policy development for IP addressing in the case of the RIR communities, but they're also about other areas and issues of collaboration and cooperation between these communities and others that might normally sit outside. So at APAC-TWNIC meetings over the last 2 years, we've developed something called the Cooperation SIG, the Special Interest Group on Cooperation, which is about the intersection of our communities with others who, as I say, might not normally join, but with whom we do have to cooperate. And that's been supported at the APAC-TWNIC level by Joy Chen of TWNIC as a really excellent and dedicated co-chair. And it's fantastic to see the Cooperation SIG also being instantiated here in the TWNIC OPM at the local level. And I really would encourage the audience here to take an interest in that event. Back to this event, I'm really happy that APAC-TWNIC is able to participate and has been welcomed to participate so actively. We've got various APAC-TWNIC staff on the agenda here who will offer different reports and perspectives about different areas of APAC-TWNIC's work, of their work at APAC-TWNIC, both technical and non-technical. And it really is an honour for APAC-TWNIC and APAC-TWNIC staff to be featured as a part of this event with the Taiwan community. So thank you for that again. We're always ready to work with TWNIC to interact with you in the TW community. to learn from you and your needs to serve you together with TWNIC. I say that very sincerely, and the APNIC doors are always open to you and your and anything you might need from APNIC. Just to close, we really do have deep links with TWNIC, and showing how and recognising how TWNIC really these days is an advanced organisation committed to the bigger picture of internet development, internet governance, and the wider internet ecosystem. The role that TWNIC plays in CERT, in the TW CERT, in the domain name, in internet governance, in building the technical capacity in Taiwan is really to be recognised and to be supported and built. Thank you very much to TWNIC staff, to Anthony, to Ching Heng, to Joy, and to Kenny. Congratulations to you all for putting this event together, and thanks again for having us here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson, for your remarks and for joining us today online. Our next speaker is Dr. Eugene Lee, Chairman of the Board at Taiwan Network Information Center. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Lee.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engagement Forum. As a TWNIC chairman of the board, I'm pleased to be here today and welcome you to join the second ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engagement Forum and the 35th TWNIC IP Open Policy Meeting. Thank you for your participation. Many organizations and individuals work together very hard to organize this great event. Thanks them, and also thanks Kenny. We have experienced a unique 2020. The pandemic has changed the way we live and work. The internet has become more essential than ever. As business and the organization rely on the internet to provide crucial service, working from home has become a norm in work life instead of a fashion, and more activities are counting on the stable and uninterrupted internet. These changes also test the respectivity toward digital transformation of both enterprise and the public. There will be the lasting impact on our life in the post-pandemic era. The good thing is that we are still connected and collaborated with the rest of the world through internet. More than 87% of people in Taiwan use the internet according to TWNIC 2020 survey. It has deeply rooted the daily life of Taiwanese people. Innovation and the application of technologies has advances every day. The internet space of Taiwan is also changing. Many aspects such as the public policies, privacy, and the cybersecurity need to keep up with the changing technology. We have arranged a series of agenda to discuss on these topics. As a member of the global internet community, TWNIC is working with ICANN to ensure the resistance of the internet. TWNIC management unique identifiers such as the .tw, .taiwan domain names, the IP address allocation, routed service operations, and cybersecurity response in Taiwan. The internet bandwidth has increased, as well as the IPv6 adoption rate with the help of our stakeholders. We are dedicated to working together with our local and global stakeholders to make the internet space better and better in Taiwan. Apart from this outreach effort, The TWNIC also provides information on the current trend and the policies of the Internet organizations and continuously support development and thriving the Internet community in Taiwan. We understand the growth of an ecosystem comes with the demanding work and effort on supporting every element in the system. Internet ecosystem is no exception. It relies on elements like the government, academia, and technology community, civil society, and the private enterprise, which we call stakeholders, to participate whether in relevant topical discussion or policy development. The growth of a healthy ecosystem of Internet governance is what TWNIC and other Internet organizations are supporting. The second ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engagement Forum and the 35th TWNIC IP Open Policies Meeting is the platform we intended to build for conversation and collaborations with our stakeholders. Your support and participations will allow us to explore diverse topics in the Internet space and reach consensus in the dialogue. This may be a small step of the Internet governance process, but it is the most crucial one. I would like to express my gratitude to you and for your participations and our advisor, co-organizer, and sponsors for giving us the opportunity to host this forum. We hope you will enjoy the discussion today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee, please take your seats, and thank you once again for your remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the first keynote speech today. Our first keynote speaker today is Professor Milton Muller. Professor Muller is currently teaching at the School of Public Policy, Georgia Institute of Technology. His research focuses on the political economy of the Internet, including property rights, institutions, and global governance in the information and communications industry. He is also one of the founders of the Internet Governance Project and has played a leading role in organizing and mobilizing civil society in ICANN and OECD. It is our great honor to invite Professor Muller to be one of our keynote speakers today. He is going to talk about why regulating social media is really about controlling the Internet, which echoes the concern we have about the freedom of expression in the digital media era. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Muller.
Well, hello, everybody. And again, to echo Paul, I'm really sorry I can't be there. I want to thank Anthony for inviting me. He invited me last year, and of course, the whole thing was canceled. And I was really looking forward to visiting Taipei this year. And of course, that didn't happen, but I am visiting you remotely. And I'll try to make this as lively as possible. So let me share my screen and get my slides up. And how does that look? Everything okay? All right, so my topic is indeed free expression and its importance to democracy and the way internet and social media are affecting it. Let's begin about talking about social media in general. Social media and the internet expand our capacity for communication and social interaction. They allow people to mobilize, express opinions, exchange cultural artifacts, and share information at an unprecedented scale. They support transactions and payment systems. One of the largest specimens of current social media, YouTube, has 2.3 billion users, more than any nation state, and a presence in over 100 countries. Its video content covers 80 languages, and 500 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute. Facebook, another big one, has 2.8 billion active users, and 1.8 billion of them visit the site daily. Now, some of the regulatory concerns about social media appear to be matters of economic policy. Network effects, economies of scale, and a business model based on advertising all contribute to the concentration of user populations into large platforms. People love to refer to platforms as monopolies, but this isn't quite correct. They are big, but they straddle multiple overlapping markets where none of them are anywhere near close to being the sole and exclusive supplier. Although there are tremendous advantages to scope and scale in these markets, there's a surprisingly large number of social media platforms. As the rise of TikTok in the United States demonstrates, new platforms can come into being and achieve critical mass quite rapidly if they innovate. The example of TikTok, which is Chinese, also demonstrates the importance of foreign capital and global market access in fostering competition and innovation. Now, at the present time, there's a powerful backlash against social media. Despite the economic issues I mentioned, most of this backlash is driven by issues related to content on social media. And this worries me, because I think it's also a backlash against the way information technology and global connectivity have eliminated traditional gatekeepers and controls over communication. In other words, it's in some ways a backlash against the internet itself. To begin to illustrate this, let me introduce you to somebody who's probably not one of your favorite people, or maybe he is. But this is probably a familiar story. The story of the Capitol Hill riots in the United States. Those riots lasted a couple of hours, but they had a lasting impact on public policy towards social media in my country. Our former president, as you know, refused to accept the fact that he lost the election. This wasn't just any election, by the way. The stakes seemed extremely high, and the electorate was very polarized. It sparked levels of voter turnout in the United States that had not been seen for more than 50 years. Now, Biden won the election with only 51.3% of the popular vote. And when Trump was declared the loser, of course, he told his political supporters that the election had been stolen. Legally, that lie never got anywhere. The courts didn't buy it. No election officials supported it or acted on it, even in Republican-run states. But Trump kept saying it nevertheless, building up anger and resentment among his hardcore followers. Now, Trump's doomed electoral challenge culminated in the events of January 6th. For the preceding month, Trump backers had been promoting a rally in Washington on that date because that was the day that Congress was supposed to certify the election results. When it was clear that attempts to challenge the electoral count in Congress would fail, Trump went before the crowd and encouraged them to fight. They then marched to the Capitol, and about 300 of them violently broke into the building, interrupting the certification process. In the wake of this attack, Trump and his acolytes were discredited. Trump himself was deplatformed, removed from Twitter and Facebook. In fact, Facebook and Twitter removed thousands of accounts associated with Trump and the right, or the extreme right. Later, and this is my crucial point, in hearings on social media regulation, members of the US Congress basically blamed Facebook, Twitter, and Google for the riots. They pointed out repeatedly that the rioters had used Facebook pages and other social media to connect with each other. They pointed out that Trump had used social media to spread his disinformation that the election had been stolen. Cable news and the New York Times and many other progressive media outlets echoed this theme. In short, social media was put on trial for the riots well before the actual rioters were. Now let me tell you a different story. On February 23rd, 2020, in my home state of Georgia, Ahmad Marquez Arbury, a 25-year-old African-American man, was jogging down a street in Brunswick, Georgia. He was unarmed. Now, Brunswick is a small, fairly rural, mostly white town. And two men noticed him and kind of assumed that he was a criminal. So they grabbed their guns and chased him in their pickup truck. And when they caught up, they tried to arrest him in what they called a citizen's arrest. In the ensuing struggle, Arbury was shot 3 times and died in the street. Now, for more than a month, no one was arrested or prosecuted for this killing. No one. Indeed, one of the men who did it used to work for the Brunswick Police Department and knew the local district attorney. Law enforcement authorities recused themselves and passed the buck. Nothing happened until May 5th. And what happened on May 5th? Well, a video of the shooting was given to a local radio station, found its way onto YouTube and Twitter, and went viral. Within hours, the case got the attention of the state attorney general and the governor of Georgia. An investigation was started by law enforcement at the state level. The perpetrators were quickly arrested. All 3 of the white men involved are now on trial for murder. And months later, Georgia's citizens arrest law was changed in order to prevent incidents like this in the future. So these 2 stories make for an interesting contrast, don't they? Social media was put on trial for the January 6th riots, but its role in the Arbury incident was not called out. There have been no congressional investigations about how YouTube helped to expose injustice and produce legal reforms. There are no newspaper stories cheering on open social media for exposing and helping to rectify a racist incident. No one praised social media for its role in the George Floyd case either. Even though it was Twitter and YouTube images of his final minutes that sparked nationwide protests and the prosecution of the police officers involved. For that matter, no one made a big deal out of the role of free and open social media in Hong Kong's rebellion against domination by China's Communist Party. So there's a discrepancy here, and I'm calling your attention to it for a reason. It exposes a distortion in the way internet and social media are being portrayed in the current public discourse. And those distortions have important consequences for internet governance. I believe, and this is probably a controversial statement, I believe that social media is being attacked precisely because it is structurally the most democratic form of public communication that has ever existed. It made anyone a publisher. It allowed people holding the most diverse viewpoints, even crazy viewpoints, to find each other and coalesce. It eliminated gatekeepers. It made political borders almost irrelevant. And it's even starting to overcome many linguistic barriers. Social media made it possible for all kinds of people, good, bad, and ugly, to attract a following and attempt to monetize it or leverage it. Building on the internet connectivity that came before it, social media applications created more sophisticated forms of interaction, giving birth to a vast virtual society which is not entirely under the control of pre-existing power structures. This scared a lot of people. We are now in a period of reaction. Since 2016, we have seen a partisan, ideologically based attack on that new social capability. Surprisingly, people on the left, at least in the United States, are the ones who seem to be the most afraid. They believe that social media is responsible for the right-wing populism that Donald Trump exemplified. Although that assertion is uninformed, even ridiculous, they believe that social media caused Trump, that it caused the election of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, that it caused white nationalism, that it caused the Christchurch killer in New Zealand, that it is responsible for human rights violations in Myanmar, not the government of Myanmar, which is doing most of the bad work, but social media. Indeed, we are told that social media is destroying democracy. It is flooding the world with disinformation and hate speech and making us helpless pawns of foreign powers interfering with our elections. This is the narrative that we're getting from the progressive left. Now, don't write me off as a cyber utopian. I know that bad things happen in this vast virtual society. It is, after all, a human society. Its inhabitants bring with it all the forms of abuse, crime, and conflict that existed before, and sometimes even new tools, new forms of abuse, like ransomware, computational propaganda, identity theft, and disinformation campaigns. Now, these are real problems, but I think their impact is being massively exaggerated, and I am actually optimistic about the way we can handle these problems, just as we have mitigated and handled other problems with the new capabilities of the internet. And we can do this without destroying the freedom and openness of the internet. The negative narrative about social media is fueling a worldwide crackdown on the capabilities of internet-enabled communication. Many of these crackdowns are enacted by dictatorships, but some of them are by democracies. Countries such as China have always viewed social media as dangerous, something to be carefully controlled. The negative narrative about social media is making those party dictators feel vindicated. We told you so, they said. You need to control this. In Brazil, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Egypt, the alleged pathologies of social media are justifying laws that are little more than traditional censorship regimes. Even when state censorship is not involved, and this is crucial, the companies that run the big platforms are getting the message loud and clear. The message is your job is to actively manage the nation's political discourse, and you shall do this in a way that actively suppresses any movement, any ideas that the ruling party finds threatening. And this is what convinces me that, whether they know it or not, the real target of the attack on social media is a general capacity to speak, mobilize, and organize without traditional forms of intermediation or hierarchical supervision. And that means the target is democracy and freedom of expression itself. Here's an example. Just last week, YouTube removed a recording of a routine policy discussion about the efficacy of putting masks on children. Two of the people in that discussion believed that you didn't need to put masks on children and they could go back to school without them. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Why not discuss this? Why not have an open scientific discussion? The panel included health experts from Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard. These were not amateurs or crazy people. But Google removed this video. They claimed that the panel was misinformation. The company said it removed the video because, quote, it included content that contradicts the consensus of local and global health authorities regarding the efficacy of masks to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So they are pretending that there is a rigid and clear consensus about something that there is not. And this is inevitable when you ask them to moderate public discourse. Here's another even worse example. Tech reporters for the New York Times and The Guardian recently published articles targeting Telegram, WhatsApp, and Signal. You've probably heard of these. These are two-way messaging apps with end-to-end encryption. The reporters, who are liberals, progressives, you would think they'd be all for freedom of speech and democracy, but they were complaining about them, not because of the usual song and dance about advertisements and surveillance capitalism. No, the reporters were worried because these apps enabled private conversations to take place. And that was risky, they said, because people might be expressing thoughts and opinions that were socially unacceptable. Or they might be plotting insurrections like the Trump thing. Indeed, these private conversations could take place not only in pairs of people, but among hundreds of people. Unsupervised discussions among large groups. I kind of thought that's what democracy was about freedom of expression was about, with no possibility of content moderation by the corporation or the government. But these reporters found that to be a scary thought. The foundation of democracy is the idea of popular sovereignty, the idea that people can govern themselves and that they delegate their powers of self-governance to the government, to the state, in order to collectively express that sovereignty. Freedom of expression is one of the pillars of self-governance. This has been known since the 18th century. Freedom of expression is more than just an individual right to entertain your own thoughts and opinions, to do your own thing. It's also a very practical tool for democratic self-governance. It's a means of keeping your government accountable and of seeking and finding the truth, and of keeping the public informed. You cannot properly exercise the right to vote or hold public officials accountable unless you're free to investigate what they do. And you cannot be certain about anything, about any assertion about what's happening or what's true, unless you can debate it and discuss it and see it challenged in the open space. So separating the press and religion from the state was the first step we took centuries ago. And that, of course, is a logical corollary of liberal democracy. The state is a coercive monopoly, and while you need coercion to execute certain state functions, like arresting criminals, if the state can dictate or coerce thought and public opinion, you don't have a democracy. The people are no longer controlling the government is controlling the people. So how much of the criticism of human interactions on social media are just critiques of human freedom? We should know that in a democracy, some politicians are going to be demagogues, many will lie, some will be corrupt, some members of the population will choose to support bad policies and even advance destructive or discriminatory ideas. That's taken for granted. But liberal democracy is based on the idea that you can only solve those problems by protecting individual freedoms, by protecting freedom of association and democratic processes. An open and free media will expose the corruption, and the public will punish bad policies and bad politicians by voting them out of office or arresting them as criminals. And if you don't believe the public can do this, they can't be trusted to do this, you're not a Democrat. I don't know what you are. You could be a paternalist, you could be a communist, you could be a lot of things, but you are not a believer in democracy. Democracy does not mean that every citizen is an angel or that only correct ideas and good social movements will form. It simply means that social conflicts over policy and governance will be resolved through peaceful democratic means, by voting, by law, and that certain fundamental rights will be respected in the process, such as freedom of expression and privacy and the right to due process. And freedom of expression is an essential component of that, indeed the most important element of the public's capacity to peacefully deliberate over what is in the public good, over what is true and what is not. To impose greater controls on speech and association simply gives the forces who wish to manipulate public discourse more powerful tools with which to do so. This was a policy recommendation on this slide advanced in the United States. I think it's self-evidently ridiculous, but you can read it. Yes, what we need is a reality czar, somebody to tell us what is true and what is not, a government czar, which is a Russian term for Caesar. Where do they get these people? So let me conclude by saying that social media did not create the post-election crisis in America. A misguided political movement created it. Ultimately, the problem caused by Trump's big lie was resolved politically, as it should have been. Democratic institutions and processes held. Trump and his party were punished by voters. Trump not only lost the election, but the Republican Party lost its Senate majority. It lost control of Congress, due in no small part to Trump's attacks on the election's legitimacy in my own state of Georgia, which energized Democratic voters and encouraged them from participating and discouraged his own Republican voters from participating in the runoff elections. The Capitol riots discredited the president further. Democracy and free expression proved to be more resilient than we are giving it credit for. So the attack on social media embodies a set of normative and positive assumptions about the relationship between communications technology, behavior, and political authority that are not democratic and are not pro-internet freedom. Having identified those assumptions, we can see that they denigrate the vastly expanded capabilities of communication and information. They are saying that the internet is dangerous because it frees us from the monitoring and control of authorities. These arguments are fundamentally at odds with classical liberal ideas about free expression, freedom of association, and privacy. They are fundamentally at odds with notions of democracy, social welfare, and self-governance. Whether intentionally or not, they justify authoritarian supervision of all communication and all behavior. I will leave it at that. I look forward to any questions or comments you might have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Muller. Due to time constraint, we will not open the floor for questions at the moment. However, Professor Muller is going to join us at the high-level opening plenary later. So if you have any questions for Professor Muller, you're welcome to direct your questions later on at the high-level opening plenary. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the second keynote speech today. Our second keynote speaker is Mr. Pablo Hinojosa. Mr. Hinojosa is the Strategic Engagement Director at APAC-TWNIC. He represents APAC-TWNIC in the public sector primarily by fostering and managing relationships with governments, key intergovernmental and treaty organizations, as well as related bodies. Today, Mr. Hinojosa will explore 4 trends in internet governance in the past 2 decades. In particular, how democratic has internet governance been, how national interests have been protected, how multi-stakeholder decisions have been made, and how security has been considered. His speech will highlight the importance of active participation by different stakeholders in shaping the future of internet governance. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our second keynote speaker, Mr. Pablo Hinojosa.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I hope so. My name is Pablo. It is a real honor to be here with you today. As Paul Wilson, my boss, said this morning at the welcoming ceremony, This engagement forum is an important event that shows the commitment not only from TWNIC, but also from the Taiwanese internet community as a whole to the wider internet ecosystem. I will be talking today about internet governance, its trends and opportunities. This is something that I wrote as an introduction. In the last 20 years or so, there have been many changes in the internet governance landscape. Many principles, norms, and decision-making procedures have been developed and applied, effectively shaping the evolution and use of the internet. But for many years, internet governance focused mostly on internet numbers and domain names. But today, it is referring to something far more extensive than that. Today in my presentation, I will explore 4 trends in internet governance during the last 20 years. I will talk about how democratic has internet governance been, how national interests have been protected, how multi-stakeholder decisions have been made, and how security has been considered. Now, it is important to say that my suggested answers to these questions are not necessarily true. I am not a professor that have been doing research, and I'm going to demonstrate my answers through measurements and data. The answers that I present here are just a point of view. You can say opinions about how in APAC-TWNIC we interpret the internet governance story of the last 20 years. So these points of view are subject to discussion, and that's actually the reason why I'm bringing this to you. And I encourage you to challenge my perspective, so I hope to leave time for questions at the end. Also, it's important to say that the history of internet governance is still fresh and young, and many of these issues have not settled completely. So we in APAC-TWNIC are interested to discuss this with you, whether these interpretations that I'm going to give make sense or not. And based on this interpretation, the fact is that we take decisions and we encourage community to take decisions to engage actively in internet governance matters.
Excuse
so
me?
That's how I'm going to, yes?
Excuse me, Mr. Hinojosa, do you mind sharing your PowerPoint slides with us on the screen?
I think I have, right? You are not seeing them?
We are not seeing your PowerPoint slides at the moment.
Oh, I think you should. I have shared my screen.
Do you mind sharing it again? It's at the bottom of the screen.
Yes.
Yes, you are sharing it. Yes, now we see your slides. Please continue. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Sorry about that. I didn't notice that you didn't get them. So these are the 4 trends that I'm going to explore. These are the 4 questions that I'm going to give. These are interpretations. How democratic has internet governance been? How national interests have been protected? How multi-stakeholder decisions have been made? And how security has been considered? Okay, let's get into each of the sections. Each one has its own color. Democratic is blue, and how democratic internet governance have been. And it's interesting because what do you mean by democratic? What do you mean by national interest, et cetera, et cetera? So in each of these sections, I will provide an interpretation, and then I will show some videos of key people whose perspectives have shaped these trends. Actually, let me stop sharing and share again, because I need to be sure that the sound is on. So can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so what do we mean by democratic? Well, it is clear that internet has grown enormously in the last 20 years, connecting more than half of the world's population. This has resulted in increased participation of many new players in internet governance processes and decisions as well. 20 years ago, there were only a handful of countries that were active in the internet governance scene. But today, it is clear that both the developed and the developing world see the internet and connectivity as most important and strategic. I see this increased participation as the reason why internet governance has become more democratic over the years. As I said in the beginning, initially, internet governance was not was mostly about internet numbers and domain names. And this is also why I see the IANA transition completed in 2016 as a democratic milestone for internet governance. As you know, the IANA functions are critical to the internet and were controlled for many years by the government of the United States, the Department of Commerce. And in 2016, the exceptional role of one single government, the United States government, was transferred or democratized to a wider internet community of diverse stakeholders who basically are now in charge of overseeing the IANA functions. Here I will present the video from Ambassador David Gross. At the time, in 2005, he was the head of delegation of the United States, and he was defending the interests of the United States government in front of United Nations World Summit on the Information Society. So this is a video taken before he left Washington to go to Tunis to defend the interests of the United States government. Let's hear what he said.
We are in the middle of the negotiations now about internet governance and a whole host of other issues to prepare the documents for the summit in November. We have a number of jobs to do as we negotiate the text of these documents. First and foremost is not to lose that which we already have. We believe, of course, with tremendous passion and zeal, that the genius of the internet was its less regulated nature. That government should stay out, but for those few very, very narrow situations where it's needed. And so how we can engage in a dialogue that gives them comfort about our intentions and the role of the U.S. government, while at the same time not endangering one iota of the sorts of things that we care about and are important, not just for the United States, but because we think they're important for everyone.
So as you can see, the U.S. position was very strong, and they were opposed at the time when many developing countries were starting to get into the internet era. And they were opposed at the time to democratize the IANA functions, which were the key focus of internet governance back in those days. Let me go now to message that Dean Cerf provided in one of the ICANN meetings about the process that led towards the IANA transition.
The project began with support from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in 1973, and in fact, preceding that was the ARPANET project starting in 1968. But as time went on, responsibility for this system devolved from DARPA to the Defense Communications Agency, which is now called DISA, and then to the National Science Foundation, and then ultimately to the Department of Commerce. And in those transitions, the United States government reduced its position, its authority, its decision-making activity with regard to internet. This was a continuous, essentially relegation or delegation of responsibility away from the government.
A continuous relegation or delegation of responsibility away from the government. So as years passed, the internet governance landscape became more inclusive and democratic, particularly as the IANA functions moved away from the oversight of one single government. So this is what I propose as the democratic trend in internet governance. I mean, as you can see, the UN summit back in 2005, which was the second phase of it, the end of it, triggered sort of more participation and more inclusion of more countries, of more stakeholders into the internet governance world. And it reached a milestone in the IANA transition, as I've said. But I would like to suggest that in the last few years, only powerful players, being governments or big tech companies, as Milton said in his presentation before, they are the ones making decisions, mostly in closed rooms with little participation from stakeholders and relevant communities. So I see in the last years the democratic trend has diminished somehow. Let's go to the protection of national interests throughout the history of internet governance. What I suggest here is that there is obviously a trend about how this global infrastructure that is the internet has challenged key principles of international law and international relations, namely that each state has sovereignty over its own territory and domestic affairs, to the exclusion of all external powers. So the internet clearly challenged this model, known as the Westphalian model, and there are more laws and regulations at the local level, and it is the more national laws and regulation, the more difficulty it is to standardize them internationally. There is no such thing as a global treaty to understand how internet governance works, or a global organization that is in charge of all of these. So it is difficult to protect national interests on the internet because it is such a complex system, and imposing cross-border jurisdictional issues is indeed complicated. For example, with data localization. So of course, this has triggered a perception of cyber instability. It's a perception because, as we know, the internet has remained very stable, particularly resilient during this pandemic time that all of us rely on this infrastructure very much. But there is this perception of cyber instability that has triggered many countries to want to exercise some sort of cyber sovereignty. Let's listen to Chancellor Angela Merkel. She was talking in 2019 at the Internet Governance Forum in Berlin.
Some in this world find that such an open internet, a free internet, and the decentralized structure of the internet is an irritant in the eyes of some non-democratic states, and their leadership interfere in the freedoms that the internet creates. They are trying to push through their own or national interests, and to this end they are trying to shut off their national networks from the global internet. And some private companies too invest in their own isolated infrastructure, which then entails the danger that global companies build up parallel universes with their own standards, their own rules, that then they impose through international bodies on others. That's a very, very tricky issue. We have to understand that we need to act multilaterally, and this will be the only way how we can actually come to a common understanding what we mean when we talk of an open internet.
So this trend towards protecting national interests is also reflected at the international level, and how the defense of national interests and the international setting has created more and more tensions between countries on internet governance matters. I want to show another perspective that reflects on this trend about protecting national interests. This is from the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, also speaking at the IGF.
Internet emerging: Californian cyberspace and Chinese cyberspace. In other words, one model where we have globally dominant private sector actors, which of course have a lot going for them, many qualities, but these people were not democratically elected. And I personally would not give up all decisions concerning my life up to these actors. That's the self-management, self-regulation model, which is not democratic. On the other hand, we have a strong state model, the Chinese model. The government is in control. Major AI players are government-controlled. So in that model, the state is present, and in fact, it's the hegemon. But what we need is a new way forward, whereby states work hand in hand with civil society actors and the private sector to introduce regulation.
So here is where he speaks about the stronger enforcement of regulation at the national and the international level. So this is our interpretation of national interest trend that has, in our opinion, no question that the trend is towards an increased protection of national interests in the last 20 years. There was some moment, for example, in the 90s where some, like John Perry Barlow, in his famous Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, he promoted a notion of cyberspace as a separate from government or national control. And clearly, states have been very active in controlling and regulating this global infrastructure and imposing virtual walls to protect their national interests. Another example of this trend is how local regulations, for example, the European GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, have an effect in how national interests are protected and enforced internationally. Of course, the more nationalistic internet governance becomes, the more tensions and conflict we can expect around internet matters as well. Okay, this takes me to the third trend I'm going to talk about, which is multi-stakeholder decisions around internet governance. So one feature of the multi-stakeholder model is that the more actors are involved, the better decision outcomes occur or are made. Particularly, this works if it is possible to find paths towards agreements. And this only works as well when everyone has a collaborative spirit. The multi-stakeholder model has worked very well in the governance of internet names and numbers, as you all know, clearly showing how bottom-up and community-driven processes can result in good policies and community-driven decisions. But it is also true that this multi-stakeholder model of the governance of the internet has been difficult to export or replicate in other areas different from internet addresses. I refer again to the IANA transition because it was a milestone where trust was placed into the multi-stakeholder model instead of a government-centered model. Whether this model can endure or will endure and expand in something is yet to be seen, and much work needs to be done to demonstrate the capabilities of a multi-stakeholder model. Let me show a video of Ira Magaziner. He is one of the designers of the multi-stakeholder institutional model that gave birth to organizations such as ICANN and its unique decision-making model.
Okay, so the internet was still very small, but we felt that there needed to be some market-driven, quickly moving vehicle that could embody the marketplace and the multi-stakeholders in the internet, but be recognized by governments so that legally they could withstand legal challenges to what they were doing. And after a comment process and so on, a year and a half, ICANN was born from that process. And it was a first of its kind organization in the world, where you had a private nonprofit organization recognized by governments, with governments playing an advisory role. Now, we did that because we felt that even though we were supporters of the United Nations overall, that the internet needed to be market-driven, it needed to be bottoms-up, it needed to be democratic, and it needed to move quickly.
So, speaking about the trend, I reflect that there was an increasing period of time in which multi-stakeholder model became more relevant. This again started from the UN World Summit on Information Society and peaked at the IANA transition. However, it seems that in the last years, multi-stakeholderism is not expanding. Actually, I suggest it is contracting. Many discussions in the international and intergovernmental arena have closed doors to multi-stakeholder participation and have restricted decision-making only to governments, or, as Milton reflected, to big tech companies that they don't have community-driven decision-making in setting up their policies. Let's look at the last trend that I'm going to explore, which is about security. And I think it is not controversial to say that worries about cybersecurity has increased in the last 20 years. Fact is that the more that we are concerned about security, the less trust we have on the internet as a global system. And many of the national responses to incidents, being these incidents state-driven or not, I mean, they tend to increase tensions and conflict, which we can see a lot these days. And also Milton showed us a lot of examples of how those tensions are amplifying rather than diminishing. And obviously, decisions about security may have unintended consequences, such as those attempts by governments to implement policies for content takedown or filtering that have led to accidental BGP hijacking, even disconnecting a huge portion of population to access content that was not that was relevant and important. Let me show you the Secretary General of the United Nations in one of his remarks, who speaks about sort of this trend.
Today, not only we are still building physical walls to separate people, but that there is also the tendency to create some virtual walls in the internet also to separate people. The growing frequency and severity of cyber attacks are undermining trust and encouraging states to adopt offensive postures for the hostile use of cyberspace.
This takes me to this reflection that throughout the years, security incidents have become more sophisticated with more damaging consequences and increasing perception of risks and concerns, mostly, as I've said, at the national level. So the suggestion here is an exponential trend where security concerns have increased dramatically in the last few years. Here are some examples of these incidents. So these four trends are leading me towards sort of my concluding remarks. If we try to see them all together, we can see sort of a trend in democratization, a trend in protecting national interests, a trend in multi-stakeholderism and securitization of the internet governance history. And I place here this line, which is actually the milestone of the IANA transition, to provide a reflection of what is coming next after the IANA transition in these four categories. And this brings me back to the original idea of this engagement forum in this open policy meeting that actually encourages the Taiwanese internet community to be active and engaged in a wider ecosystem. And what I'm trying to say is that this community's views and interpretation of how the history is should provide or prescribe the positions that we need to take. And I see opportunities to reverse some of the trends that are happening during the last few years in order for these trends to be more democratic, less nationally focused, more multi-stakeholder, and less concerned with security, in order for us to arrive to something that I think we shared in common, which is a mission about an open, stable, and secure internet. And I think I will want to leave you with these reflections, and I still have 6 or so minutes open for questions. So I just want to thank everyone to listen to these trends and opportunities and interpretation of the history of internet governance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hinojosa, for sharing your insights with us. We still have a couple of minutes left, so we would like to open the floor for maybe one question. So if you have any questions, please come forward and use these 2 microphone stands that we have here. So is there any questions from the floor? Do we have any questions? Yes, please. Please use the microphone stands, and please briefly identify your name and also the affiliation before you ask your questions. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for your very interesting and informative talk. My name is Patrick Boland. I'm from AIT, which is the American Institute in Taiwan here. I just had a question, looking at the trends of democratization and multi-stakeholder going down at the same time as securitization and national interest going up. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about your view from AP-TWNIC about the role of governments in that, and if you see a trend, whether it's through the balkanization of the internet itself, growing firewalls, or if it's actual government policy that's been responsible for that, or do you think the private sector plays a bigger role there? Thank you for your comments.
Stakeholder model, and we truly believe that decisions are better made when the interested parties, and particularly for us when the technical community is considered. Because we see a lot that governments may want to protect certain interests, but not necessarily consider unintended consequences that may affect the technical operation of the network. So it is something that we always try to bring, a collaborative notion of cybersecurity, a collaborative notion between operators and policymakers, and that dialogue that we think is always very important for any internet governance consideration.
Is there just as a quick follow-up, is there more that certain governments can do or to engage this, or do you have any comment about how other governments try to stifle the multi-stakeholder nature of the internet?
Well, there is certainly room for much more for governments to do, but also, very importantly, for technical community to also do and engage proactively and be very active in shaping the internet governance that we want. And that's why the proposal here is to forums such like these engage actively in these discussions and engage actively in other discussions for these trends to be more democratic and more multi-stakeholder, and reduce that perception of instability or those tensions that arise from cybersecurity matters.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hinojosa. We still have one more question from the floor, and due to time constraints, that will be our last question for this session, please.
Pablo, nice to see you here.
Hello, I wish I would be there.
Yeah. Actually, I'd like to add a comment regarding for the previous questions. Okay, this is the Galway retirement person. Okay. And TWIGF, okay. And actually, my comment is, government always have a role in the national security or whatever. But the government have to be very careful, because the government usually, they are not technical capable enough to deep into this kind of security issues. Sometimes they will overdo it. When they are overdue, it's really a tragedy. So, like Pablo say, the multi-stakeholder, I think basically in Taiwan, the multi-stakeholder how to, the mechanism, how to in the operation in Taiwan. We still have a long way to learn. I think if you are in Taiwan enough to watching about the public hearing of the legislature, well, that is not like a U.S. public hearing. And they even not in so-called multi-stakeholder mechanism yet. Because the multi-stakeholder mechanism, we should come out a different view from the different actor, and just like Pablo say, when you are talking about the security, we need more technical community to participate, to tell you how to justify enough and not overdo. When that is overdue, that would be really bad. And we see that happen before several times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wu, for your comments. And thank you, Mr. Hinojosa, for answering all these questions. Due to time constraints, we're going to close this session here. Let us thank our keynote speaker, Mr. Hinojosa, once again, for his very insightful presentation. Thank you, Mr. Hinojosa, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to take a coffee break. Refreshment is served outside. Please help yourselves. Our next session will begin at 10:45. Please be back by 10:45. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session will begin in 1 minute. Please kindly take your seats. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session will begin very shortly. Please kindly take your seats. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engagement Forum. We will now proceed to the high-level opening plenary. In this session, we're going to discuss the state of cybersecurity, as well as its challenges, best practices, and shared responsibility. Please welcome the moderator for the session, Dr. Kenny Huang, member of the board and CEO of TWNIC. Dr. Huang, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kenny Huang. Welcome to the section. I think the configuration is a little bit strange because I'm a single man sitting on the stage. But anyway, because we have all distinguished speakers from different places, and they are already connected through online. So welcome again to join the section. This section, we're going to address some sort of security challenge. For example, we're talking about cybersecurity challenge, and we try to address the potential best practice, like a cyber norm, and what's the best approach to mitigate the cybersecurity, and also try to discuss some potential shared responsibility or shared liability. For example, like DNSSEC or RPKI, how does that impact the cybersecurity in the internet? So before I begin, I'd like to introduce all panelists, and starting from Adele Abrogan is Technical Engagement Vice President of ICANN. Adele. So the second panelist is Ahmad Zhang, CEO of Asia. Okay. The third is George Michelson, Senior Research and Development Scientist in APAC-TWNIC. Thank you, George. And next one will be Milton Muller, a professor of School of Public Policy at Georgia's Institute of Technologies. Thank you, Muller. And the last one will be Katrina Santika, CEO of .lv Registry. Thank you, Katrina. Okay, before I begin, I just quickly summarize how we try to address. When we try to address the cybersecurity, this session main focus on address the cybersecurity from the very high level, and we try to address the cybersecurity, especially regarding to the potential challenge on cybersecurity, and including the technology, regulation, cross-border jurisdiction, things like that. I would like to invite the panelists that go the first round, and please share your view with us regarding to cybersecurity challenge, not only into the internet jurisdiction, and also you probably can mention a little bit on the what would be the best practice to mitigate the cybersecurity. So I follow the order starting from Adele. Would you like to share some view from you? Okay, starting from Adele.
Yes, thank you, Kenny, and I'm happy to be on this panel. We don't say it anymore very often, but definitely it would have been better if we met face-to-face and have this discussion face-to-face. But the new normal, make us do this online. But it tied me very well into the topic I'm going to talk about today, which is particularly the DNS. The pandemic has allowed us to definitely see how the internet is critical component of our day-to-day life today. And when we know the role of the DNS, it's very obvious that we see how critical its secure operation and stable operation is for the overall internet. So I will address few aspects of the DNS security today, and from ICANN perspective. The DNS has been designed some 30 years ago with primarily simplicity in mind. Straightforward, doing something, mapping name to number, primarily allowing people to easily access services and application online using name. So that was it, and it was designed with some global trust in mind, because people know who run what and know who run which DNS. So security aspects were not built in by default. And one big element of that is the way data are shared or transmitted between the different components of the DNS, which was open. Over those 30 years, of course, this has evolved in many ways, and at the different element or components of the DNS, the protocol has evolved, the namespace has evolved, the service providing of the DNS has evolved, and the provisioning system has also changed over the time. From our perspective, securing the DNS is not a one task. It's not just one piece of it. Like for instance, the DNS as we usually talk about, but we see it as a more holistic approach, touching on all those 4 different key components of the DNS ecosystem, strengthening, hardening the protocol, adding more security to it, protecting the namespace to make sure that it is served properly, providing a service that user can trust, and also ensuring that people have a way to access the provisioning system in a secure way that does not impact the other 3. So it is an holistic approach from our view. But we usually talk, as I mentioned, about the DNSSEC, which is a way to add authentication to the interaction between resolver and authoritatives. That means when you request that mapping, the authoritative server, which are the servers set up to provide the information through some cryptographically signed mechanism, they will ascertain that the information that they're providing to the resolver is genuine because coming from them as authoritative, but they also ascertain that they have the authority to provide that information, and that can be checked back by the resolver through a chain of trust that goes up to the root. So it's not that simplicity. It doesn't encrypt the information itself. It just adds a signature so that somebody that received the information, the resolver, can verify and ascertain that what it received is accurate and should be delivered by that specific server. So that aspect of adding the authentication to the DNS has changed a little bit the protocol side, and is something that we have been raising awareness on over the past few years, and that prevents somebody in the middle of the communication to either tamper with the information or redirect the traffic to somewhere else, and prevent the end user to access the real or the genuine information he's looking for online. So that is something clear that clearly addresses a specific issue that the DNS has, but it doesn't address it all. DNS also has two aspects: the signing, which I just explained now, which give add the authenticity, but we also have the validation. It's like a form in the regular life. You fill a form, you add a lot of information, but at the end of the form, you sign it, right? To make sure that the information that you are providing is correct. But at the end of the rope, somebody has to check the signature and make sure that this signature is valid, right? You cannot just take the information and go with it. If you don't check the signature, asking the person to sign doesn't make sense. So there is also the validation part. The resolver, when it's received the information, it has to check and to validate that what he received and which is signed is accurate. It's accurately signed, and signature is coming from the right person, etc., etc. We usually don't put a lot of emphasis on that aspect of the DNSSEC. In our outreach, usually we encourage, authoritative server operator, which are usually a registry, and registrar sometimes who provide second-level authoritative server to sign their own to make sure that the information they are provided is accurate and cryptographically verifiable. But we don't put enough emphasis on the validation side, and this is something that we are trying to push more and more from ICANN side, because we consider that as a low-hanging fruit. It's something that all ISP, any IT infrastructure manager that run DNS as a resolver for their user can very easily and quickly turn on. Because if we don't have the validation side, we can sign all the zones we want. If nobody is checking, it doesn't make sense. So the validation part is also an important aspect of the DNSSEC that we are more and more putting our emphasis on and encouraging ISP or anyone running DNS to validate to make sure it is on. Luckily, more and more software vendors are today, making validation as a default feature in their software, which allow IT operator not to do too much. So it is an important thing. So to maybe conclude this first intervention, I will say that the DNS is a critical part of any IT infrastructure. It is not something you just turn on and you forget in a corner. It has its environment, and the infrastructure has to be tightened and continue being monitored. signing your zone is important for the NSEC, and we have a lot of outreach capacity building programs that help operators to do that. But validation is also key to add the trust to the customer you are serving as resolver operators in general. So I will stop there, and we'll be happy to interact with you and answer a question related to what we are doing as ICANN to promote these security measures, looking at this from a very holistic manner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adele. Thank you for your technical introduction, even address DNS and resolver issue. Actually, European Union just passed, not passed, it's just proposed European Union resolver policies. We probably can address the same topic later on. Not right now, I move to the next panelist, Ahmad Zhang, CEO of Asia. Ahmad, I remember you prepared a slide. Please go on.
Thank you, Kenny, and thank you for having me here. I would have really liked to be in Taiwan with you. In fact, I took the 2 vaccine shots and was waiting for if I might be able to get on a plane in last minute, but that didn't work. But great to be here with you. Building on what Adele said, I will focus a little bit on my introduction talk on DNS abuse. I think Adele mentioned more on the DNS system itself, but there are abuses that utilize the DNS as well. And this is something that has been a hot topic at ICANN, and also a bit of work from the registries and registrars to try to build a norm. Myself from .Asia is of course part of it. But this is the discussion about DNS abuse is not new. It's certainly been around for a while, and I don't know whether my what I'm sharing is being seen at the session, but I did share my screen. So this is a discussion that has started actually all the way, and it has intermittently has been discussed at ICANN, but especially in the new GTLDs since 2012, and then in 2017.
Sorry, Ahmad, can you share your screen, share your slide, because we didn't see your slide on the screen.
Yeah, I did try to share. I'll stop and share
okay,
again.
Right, you're right. It's coming. Hold on.
Is it coming through? All right.
Okay, right.
But we are seeing the wrong screen probably because we are seeing an ICANN website.
No, that is the part that I'm sharing. I am sharing the ICANN website because that's where the journey, I think, of DNS abuse began. This is back in 2017, and ICANN actually put out a fairly reasonable framework for looking at how to deal with abuse in registered names, unregistered names, and the reporting of such abuses to registries and how registry should respond. Since 2017, though, especially into 2019, especially between 2019 and 2020, the registries and registrars really came together to try to put forward I guess, a norm in many ways to address DNS abuse issues. And this is part of the document. And most importantly, to identify what we really mean by DNS abuse. And there were 5 items really: malware, botnets, phishing, farming, and also spam that is used to propagate the above 4. So this is something that the registries and registrars really came together and tried to develop. The genesis of that and the reason for developing that is the understanding that the DNS abuse issue is actually beyond what ICANN directly can do, and this is something that I believe in as well. But I will touch on something that I really feel for as well. So building on that common statement, I think a DNS abuse institute was put together, supported by PIR from .org and .Asia, and others are supportive of this as well. I think this tries to set a industry or industry norm going forward on thinking about DNS abuse, which is great, and it's also a very similar activity is being brought to the Internet and Jurisdiction Initiative as well, and a DNS level action to DNS abuse was put together. As you can see, this is this would be a more robust framework. It has more details, more information in it, and action and responses and those kind of things. But I'll scroll down to the kind of the important meat here, which again re-identifies a few items that is determined to be identified as abuses, technical abuses, which is malware, phishing, farming, botnets. And here you see a little bit different. So you can see fast flux included here, which is using the DNS to, switching over to different IP addresses and networks by hopping through different networks using the same domain name. And of course, spam, again, also supporting the other parts of the abuse. But so this is all great, and the addition here also is that there are content abuses, and this is where things might be a little bit outside of ICANN's purview. It includes child abuse material, like what is called CSAM, child sexual abuse material, controlled substances, violent, extreme content, hate speech, and most interestingly, intellectual property as well. So all this, I think, is great initiative, but building on what Pablo this morning said, this seems to be a direction that is driving the multi-stakeholder model down and potentially the democratization down as well. The way I see it is a little bit different, and this is and we are going to have a session tomorrow at 2 p.m. to dive more deeply into it as well. But I think it's important for the community to also look at the DNS abuse as an ecosystem, a little bit of what Adiel mentioned as well. And this is just for GTLDs, but you can, just quickly on this, the basic of it is, of course, the registry and the registrar system, and the registry produces the DNS for the TLD, and it also has WHOIS or RDAP, the registration data part. But there's more to it. There's the IANA root database, which supports the root DNS. And also many other components like DNS servers are hosted other places, the DNS resolvers, the ISPs, and many other other applications and web and email hosting that depends on it. And here's how I see it. There are things that are within ICANN's purview, which is on the left side, and there are things that are beyond ICANN's purview. There is the DNS, there's the infrastructure, and there's also the content, and there's different types of content. And what is interesting to note is that this is sort of my little bit of a conclusion, is that abuse happens at different aspects and different parts of the infrastructure. However, there is a part that ICANN does, and can play a role. And this is a little bit of my minority view from my colleagues from registries and registrars, is that I do think that there is a role that ICANN can play. And that speaks to what Pablo said in terms of upholding the multi-stakeholder approach, rather than what Pablo quoted Chancellor Merkel in saying that we'll be forced to adopt industry standards alone. So in closing my first intervention, I think DNS abuse, of course, is a very complicated issue. It's not something that ICANN itself can deal with, but I think ICANN has a role. Of course, it's only on GTLDs, but if you look at the successful case of the UDRP, the Uniform Dispute Resolution Policy, when it is successfully deployed in the GTLD, many CCTLDs actually put in place variants of this. And this is I think, the DNS abuse situation, which continues to be a hot topic for multi-years now, I think represents an opportunity for ICANN and ICANN's community to really build and extend our work in the multi-stakeholder model and make it work for things that ICANN can start, but actually can influence other parts of the community. And with that, I will close and hand it back to Kenny.
Thank you, Ahmad. Actually, that's a very interesting topic. You gradually change the internet governance entity, become like a law enforcement agencies. But anyway, that's a very interesting topic. Against also a lot of concept actually was contradictory to each other. For example, like against the Communication Decency Act Section 230, intermediary is not liable for the third-party content, and also against the Manila Principle #1, intermediary should be shared from liability for third-party content. But anyway, we can come back to the topic later. I'd like to invite the next panelist, George Michelson, senior research scientist in APAC-TWNIC. George, your turn.
Thank you. I have some slides to share. Can you confirm if these have come through okay, please?
Yes. Okay.
So, hello everyone. My name is George Michelson. I'm from APAC-TWNIC. I'm actually currently a product manager, and I have oversight of the APAC-TWNIC resource public key infrastructure function. I also worked on specification in IETF. And I want to talk today briefly to highlight what I think are the governance qualities that we're trying to understand in this space. Originally, Joyce Chen from APAC-TWNIC was going to present, but she's unable to be here today, and please let me pass on her apologies. So, what is RPKI? Well, let's go straight in. It's the Internet Number Resource PKI. There you go, pack done. I could stop now. Well, no. What is a PKI? So PKI stands for Public Key Infrastructure. The complicated part in this is the public-private key part. That's what public means here. It's about cryptography. It's not about crypto coins, it's about the mathematics of cryptography. But the important part for a governance conversation, which is what I think we're having here, is the infrastructure word. This is not random signing. This is not like PGP between two people with no intermediary structure. There is infrastructure. There's a delegation model where people say what they know, and there's maintenance of that publicly visible structure. So this, very quickly, is about a hierarchy. And there are critical concepts in a PKI which relate to the issuer and the subject and the chains of issuer and subject that are innately hierarchical. So something to note here is that we're actually using this all the time, every day. Here's an example of a PKI you know. It's the web PKI. It's the technology behind HTTPS. So if you notice the little lock icon in this browser window over ICANN, the one that says safe browsing, well, if you click on it, it's showing you that you have a certificate, a web PKI certificate behind your website. And if you click on the icon, you get shown information like this. Now, a lot of this information is technical. It's not strictly speaking. It's about who issued the certificate. That's the public part of the PKI model, and who they issued it to, the subject, and how long it's valid. And one of the problems with this system, the web PKI, is the governance process. How do you know which certificates to accept or reject? that process of decision, it's really quite opaque. It doesn't have a public governance structure that you can easily deal with. We're actually talking about something in PKIs, which is called the trust anchor, or TA role. It's the critical governance question, aside from the operational requirements of how things work. Now, there is a governance structure behind the TAs, the trust anchors, in your browser, deciding what's acceptable behavior, rejecting non-compliant agencies. But I think a problem for us collectively is it's not a very transparent model. So here's another PKI that we're using. This is the one that's already been touched on. It's DNSSEC, and it's not certificates. It's not the same as the web PKI. This is more infrastructure inside the machine. This PKI has stellar governance. It has done really well. There's processes in ICANN, between ICANN and the CCTLDs. There's a governance process around technology with IETF. The TA function, in particular, has some of the best public exposure I have ever seen. There is a huge amount of public engagement in the maintenance of trust, in the fundamentals behind this hierarchy of signing. And even when things go wrong, that happened with battery fail in a safe protecting some of the signing materials for a public ceremony, this wasn't hidden. This was openly discussed. So I think that this is a governance standard that if we were talking about public interest governance of security and improvements in the community, this is a model we have to aspire to. Okay, so if you look at what's going on underneath in DNSSEC, it is really about cryptography. There's no certificate. By the way, I'm using here a tool called DNSViz to help understand. This was developed by a colleague of mine, Casey Decchio, who used to work at VeriSign. Very, very nice tool. So, two forms of PKI with public governance. We're using them all the time. Now, let's widen the net a bit. Do you know about the metaphor of the internet as a stool with three legs? It's a nice metaphor. Here's the internet stool. It's very simple, it's very robust, and it comes in many colors. So the three legs of the internet stool, one leg, that's ways to find addresses from names. That's the DNS, the governance in the hands of ICANN and the CCTLD. Another leg, that's addresses, handing out addresses responsibly. That's the RIR process. And the last leg is BGP. How do you find names to addresses and the relationship between them? How do you get from an address to the server that's giving you? And that's not really subject to a governance question right now because that's running in an industry-neutral space. Voila, we have a working internet. Everything else is extra. You can have cushions if you like. So what really happened is that we grew another leg, and the stool had to grow another leg. It's now a four-legged stool, and it comes in many colors. So we still have DNS, addresses, and BGP, but we now have the web. The web's everything. The web is everywhere. And people now actually assume that the other three legs are just fine. And they think of the internet as the web, right? So we're all comfortable with the infrastructure and we let it ride and we focus on the web. So if you think about the world this way, the DNSSEC and the web, the things we showed before, they have good PKI. Those PKI services are about integrity of names. And so we added stability, extra functions, into the security of two of the legs of this stool model some time ago. With RPKI, we've added strength to two more of the legs. We've strengthened routing and we've strengthened addressing. And interestingly, the PKI here, it covers two things, not one each. The two things are both covered by the same PKI. And you know, it makes a lot of sense because the function of BGP is to forward addresses. They're talking about the same thing. Building a security system for addresses and BGP to be one thing, that was quite a good move. But it introduces some interesting complexity in the difference between address governance and routing governance. So in public interest terms, in governance terms, we've developed a really nice, rugged structure. It's stable, and we understand how it works. And we've secured 4 central pillars of the ecology that we're depending on. Well, if we look at these side by side, the old familiar PKI, the newer PKI for addresses and routing, it's quite clear that we understand these things are secure. So it's a bit less secure perhaps than we'd like, but it's nonetheless happening. DNSSEC is fully deployed and available in virtually every domain. The web, well, it's so common, it's become the default. Browsers are now actually discussing in their software design not allowing you to proceed to insecure websites sometimes. The routing and addressing security, that's a little less mature. It came along later, and it's still in design in some technical parts. Governance in RPKI is in the RIR system. It's subject to a public policy consensus process, and the NRO processes, which go to some operational behaviors, and the IETF standards processes. Deployment in operations is still very much a work in progress, but we can look at it and we can see how far we're going. So, the reason that this PKI is bound into RIR is because it's so strongly aligned to the hierarchy of how addresses delegate. RPKI aligns completely with the delegation model. And so where we have national internet registries, NIRs, like TWNIC, then the RPKI model delegates down through the NIR and follows the hierarchy. So in this table, I'm showing you the levels of penetration of RPKI at the RIR level. You can see that it's variable. RIPE have done a supreme job, lots and lots of work promoting uptake. APNIC still has a way to go. AFRINIC and LACNIC are doing well. And you can see all the detail at the RIR and economy level in statistics that are available from the NRO, but also APNIC has some research information available from the lab site under BGP. Now, this is an example of the benefits of having strong local community convergence. This is the outcome of TWNIC addressing RPK uptake within the community in Taiwan. And this is an awesome outcome. They deserve a virtual round of applause because this is one of the best RPKI deliverables at this level that I have seen. So I do need to point out that some technical aspects of securing BGP, it has 2 qualities: origin, where things come from, and path, how you get there. And so far, RPKI is only securing origin. Securing path is a complexity that is still in early design. And so what this means is that we can't actually end hijacks and misrouting outcomes at this time. RPKI provides proof. It provides strong, provable attestations of what we wanted to happen. And that's a good beginning. It brings trust into the room. So we do have other NIRs. There's a delegation story here about how things are working. 4 NIRs at this time operating under APNIC actually have delegation. 2 more operate inside us, and the 3rd, VNNIC, are on the brink of delegation. From a governance perspective, APNIC is the nexus for discussion in our region, and we use the routing security SIG to guide how we operate. And that's where we discuss visible states of our service and where you would get more detailed reports on our KPIs and our duty cycle. So in summary, the reason I think the conversation is important is because we're talking about fundamentals. We had protections for 2 critical legs. We've grown protections for the other 2, and that's better. We have to understand its alignment to governance process. In our space, RPKI follows the RIR process and operations. And we have to understand this intersection between address distribution governance and between operational governance. Well, that's enough from me, so I'm going to stop here to leave time for everyone else. Thank you for listening, and thank you for letting me present today.
Okay, thank you, George. That's a very interesting topic. And also, George tried to expand the current regional internet registry from existing 3 leg to 4 leg. I believe probably we have 10 legs after the section. So the next panelist, I'd like to move to Milton Muller, a professor from Georgia Institute of Technology. Milton, that's your turn.
Thank you, Kenny. That was a very good joke, but I am not an insect. I only have 2 legs, and maybe I evolved beyond the 4 legs at some point in a distant past. I do not have slides. I'm going to kind of riff on what other people have said. When I first heard about this panel, I was planning to talk about supply chain security as an issue. That's a big deal here in the United States. It is, you know, a sign of the sort of withdrawal from globalization that some of you were talking about. I think Pablo was mentioning this. So during the 90s and the 2000s, we created this globally distributed internet and a globally distributed telecommunications infrastructure and electronics industry. And we had free trade agreements that allowed products as well as information services components to be distributed all over the world. And in the course of doing this, software is very modular. You can program a piece of it in, India, and then parts of it, maybe the firmware is done in Korea, and the United States is doing some of the design, and you're having multinational corporations that are setting it all up. And, within the space of 4 or 5 years, we have just seen this globally distributed system start to fall apart, mainly because of nation-state tensions. And there's not a lot that can be done about that without new institutions. What we know will not solve this problem is more tech nationalism. Tech nationalism is the enemy of global trust. It's the enemy of developing transnational standards and practices and procedures that will allow supply chain security in software and equipment to be developed. This is a very complicated issue. You probably heard of the solar wind hack, in which some network management software was somehow the software build process was broken into by a nation-state actor, and they actually put some backdoors and some malware into the software and had it distributed to tens of thousands of companies that were using the software all over the world, but mostly focused on the United States. And so when they uploaded their update, and because they had broken into the internal build process of SolarWinds, the update was authenticated, right? They even had the SAML thing, security markup language authentication had been controlled in a way that, or spoofed in a way that allowed this to happen. So this was a very disturbing event, and many people are talking about how to respond to it. And unfortunately, again, instead of talking about globalized institutional solutions such as the RIRs or ICANN, we are talking more and more about reinforcing nationalistic forms of institutional protection. So that's a sad story, and I will leave you with that thought because there's no simple or quick solution to it. It's a little bit more focused to talk about the RIR ICANN environment, which is what Michelson and Adiel and Edmund were talking about. And that tells you something, okay? Right there, that tells you that when we were in the early stages of setting up internet governance, we created non-national globalized institutions that built upon the IETF, which was the standardization process and was connected to that. And these private sector-based institutions have been relatively free, not completely, of course, but relatively free of the nationalistic competition and the militaristic and securitization that is hampering trust in other areas. But Mr. Michelson in particular made some very interesting points. So he said the DNSSEC has good governance. And in effect, he said it has good governance because there is a strict hierarchy for the domain name system. We have a single root. If ICANN adopts DNSSEC at the root, we can flow that security down through the top-level domain registries, and we can then distribute it to the registrars, although my impression was that the registrars were not adopting it that much. Maybe things have improved recently. I haven't been following it that closely. And of course, that is true. Having a single central trust anchor makes governance easier, but it also concentrates power. And that's been the problem with the DNS from the beginning. You know, that's why we had the controversies about the US government controlling the root, and we did solve that problem. But what we have to do is we have to embarrass ADL, and maybe Paul Wilson would be a good person to embarrass about this, and ask him, why don't we have a single central trust anchor for the addressing system? Why doesn't ICANN control the root of the addressing system? And the answer is, well, I actually thought it was a good thing that the RIRs didn't want to do that. They wanted to have their own trust anchors for their own regions. And that gave us a little bit more decentralization of authority, but it also gave us a little more complexity. So I think that's a very interesting issue to discuss. And I think in comparison that Mr. Michelson made among the trust architectures of DNS, websites, IP addressing, and routing was extremely important and interesting. I will say that people in cybersecurity studies that I deal with are not so impressed with the certificate authority structure of websites. And we know we had some major problems with that about 10 years ago. Things have improved, mainly because of Google and the, what's it called, the CA browser forum, sort of tightening up standards. And that's another example of a new global private sector-based institution that is addressing the problem, but they do not have a strict hierarchy, and it is still, I think it's generally a pretty good system, but it's a lot more flexible and a lot less easily secured than a strict hierarchy. So that's another interesting issue to discuss. Finally, I want to talk about DNS abuse. Edmund, I love you. I love .asia. I love your attacks on DNS abuse. But look, content is content, right? Content can be illegal. Content can be abusive, like child pornography is content, and it's abusive, and it's illegal. So we should do something about it. But I don't understand why people want to call this problem of illegal and abusive content as DNS abuse. You know, it's not DNS abuse, it's content. It's a question of how much do you regulate content. It's copyright infringement. It's, you know, sometimes it's just outright censorship. You know, the Chinese government or the Vietnamese government might call, or the Thai government, you know, would call insulting the king abuse. Right? So whether, of course, a domain name is going to be involved somewhere, but you're not abusing the DNS. You're doing illegal content, or you're doing abusive content. And I just don't understand why people mix these things up or somehow connect them. And the only reason to do that, and this is what scares the civil society advocates in the ICANN environment, the only reason to do that is that you're going to try to make the domain name registries and registrars into intermediaries who are responsible for the content on their system. And I think most of us don't want that to happen. And I think Kenny made a very good point about that, saying, you know, we don't expect the platforms to be legally responsible for bad content or illegal content on their platforms. We do expect them to take private initiative or editorial discretion to clean up their systems as much as they want, but we don't make them legally liable. And insofar as what Edmund is proposing is that kind of a Section 230 kind of, we're voluntarily taking a commitment to rid our systems of illegal content, you know, I may or may not agree with that in any particular instance, but it's perfectly legitimate. Just please don't call it DNS abuse. It's not DNS abuse. It's about illegal or abusive content. So one other comment about securing the path. That was a good point, that we have secured the address delegation process or authenticated it, but the path is not secured. And BGP-SEC tried to do that, and we've studied that a bit, and it's really just a top-heavy, ineffective standard. We will not get to securing the path through the BGP-SEC standard because one of the basic problems with it is economic. Basically, you don't get any improvement in security until everybody adopts it. And anybody who studies technology diffusion will tell you that when that's the case, you know, there's no incentive to get universal diffusion. RPKI, you get incremental security. If I adopt RPKI and you adopt RPKI, I get more security and you get more security. It doesn't matter if the rest of the world adopts it. With BGP-SEC and path security, that's not true. If somebody else doesn't adopt it, you just don't get more security. And it's also very expensive and very clunky. So maybe there's some new developments there that I don't know about, but I think we're a long ways away from securing a path. I think I've gone on for enough. Let's move on to the next one. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Muller. So remember, we don't call DNS abuse. We just abuse DNS itself. Okay, let's move to next panelist. Katrina, your turn.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good morning, at least for those of you who are there. Okay, let me start by sharing my slides. Well, I'll take it from a different perspective, and I will, just like previous speakers, I'm very sorry not to be there with you, so I will use technology to make it as good as possible to make sure that we get this feeling of being in the same room. Well, I think by the end of this pandemic, we will get used to all those nice tools that we use. And thankfully, internet is still working. It still works. We haven't broken it. And that's thanks to all the people who built it and who still develop and maintain the necessary infrastructure. And clearly, country code top-level domains, or CCTLDs,
sorry,
are
Katrina,
among those.
are you showing your slide?
Yes.
We didn't see the slide for the moment.
Don't you see it? Oh.
Okay. We
you
have
should
cybersecurity issues.
I'm seeing them fine.
Okay, so that's
yeah, I can see it. I can see it.
Yeah. Okay, I see that you should be seeing it then too. In the, okay. So, is it okay now?
Yeah. Okay now.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So I was trying to say that country code top-level domains, or CCTLDs, are among those who had been there from the beginning, and well, at least almost the beginning. And the oldest, maybe I should say, the most experienced CCTLDs are 30 or 35 years old. .tw, for example, has been established in 1989, correct? So in people's years, it might not seem much, but in internet years, one could say that CCTLDs are the dinosaurs of the cyberspace. We've seen the dawn of the internet. But at the same time, let's be fair. At the very beginning, there was not much to see. The landscape was pretty deserted. Over the years, situation has changed dramatically. So today, well, in the beginning, even the notion of domain names was different. It was they were seen as technical identifiers. Today, they are much more than that. They have commercial, social, in some cases even political or critical value. So no wonder that domain names are used, more and more will be used for malicious purposes. And therefore, no wonder that governments, businesses, and ordinary internet users, they want to protect their domain names and they want to protect themselves. Today, the number of organizations and governments and many different actors who want to actively participate in decision-making process is also rapidly growing. In preparation for this discussion, I found a website from ENISA. ENISA, that's the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity. They have tried to summarize all the actors in the field. So here you can see each bubble on this slide represents one institution. And that's, here we talk only about European Union. So if we look globally, the number of those governmental institutions and actors from other areas also grows exponentially, perhaps. Look at the multi-stakeholder community at ICANN. Again, we have registries, registrars, businesses, governments, users. They all coming together to discuss different topical issues. DNS abuse and cybersecurity are among those issues. Well, we all know that ICANN cannot tell CCTLDs what to do and what not to do. GTLDs, registries and registrars of generic top-level domains, they are in the spotlight. They are told to deal with this issue or to implement that measure. But does it mean that CCTLDs are immune and will never be told, not by ICANN, but by all those other actors to act and do the same, especially if at some point in the future GTLDs would offer better levels of protection. So the pressure is growing. Currently, statistically, CCTLD space is safer than GTLD space. There have been research showing that in some new GTLDs, number of malicious domains is more than 50% of all registrations. So, but no, let's not talk about those numbers. I found some other numbers, and for example, one of those is that a new phishing site launches every 20 seconds. I'm talking for, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes now, which means 12 to 15 phishing sites just popped up somewhere in the internet. So again, clearly, it's not a surprise that people want to do something to address it. Another statistic that surprised me very much recently was the data from Anti-Phishing Working Group that's saying that, you can see 80% of attacks were hosted in HTTPS. Why I thought it was interesting, because I've just heard that there are some initiatives, ideas how to make internet safer, and one of those ideas would be to mandate the use of HTTPS and DNSSEC in hope that it would make internet safer. And, as you know, that if all that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I also tried to find how many of those bad actors have enabled DNSSEC. Well, I didn't manage to find that statistics, but well, I know that many CCTLDs around the world do offer, they have signed their CCTLDs, and they offer this service. And well, I didn't find the statistics. I know that unfortunately the number of signed domains is still not very high. At the same time, I did find an article by SIDN Labs in which they do believe that well, it wouldn't be an issue for bad actors to sign their domains. So what I thought that maybe at some point TLS, DNSSEC, and other security measures will become the clearest indicators of malicious sites. Because well, definitely bad actors would try to do everything to look as legitimate as possible. But still, so what can we do? What would be the right approach here? Among CCTLDs, there is no universal approach to handle that. Each CCTLD chooses their own path. Some stay away from any other function except the technical ones. They believe that, no, we do only our technical thing. Some others do believe that if they do nothing, they will be extinct in the nearest future. So they try to be more proactive. They have proactive stance and they develop policies and actively fight abuse in their zones. I already mentioned this, and in this aside, so this another aspect that they're showing. This is here. Here they have some functions, or they call them priorities. So for institutions that are involved in cybersecurity. And I was glad to see that there are many things that, among those bubbles, that CCTLDs are already doing, like training, R&D, capacity building, awareness raising, and many other things. But one particular one, I believe, is really important, especially when we talk about CCTLDs, and that's information sharing and cooperation. For CCTLDs, those are regional organizations like APAC-TWNIC in Asia Pacific, CCNSO, which is a global platform body within ICANN structure created by and for a country called top-level domain registries. And conferences like this one, they serve as platforms that allow CCTLDs, and not only CCTLDs, to learn from each other, share best practice, and discuss the best approaches of how to move forward. Now, personally, I have greatly benefited from sharing, from learning from others, and therefore I firmly believe that importance of such platforms will only grow. So with that, I will finish my very brief intro. So thank you very much. Kenny, back to you.
Okay, right. Thank you, Katrina. I saw you speak longer, so we have 30 minutes earlier. Okay, before I hand over to the floor, just quickly one question, one to Ahmad and also to Professor Milton Muller. And because Professor Milton Muller addressed that a platform provider or registry should not liable for the third-party content. And first question to Ahmad, would you like to respond to your DNS abuse for the first accused?
Yeah, definitely. I think I need to respond, and if you allow me to share my screen again to just illustrate what I wanted to say. First of all, I definitely do not think that content abuse is part of DNS abuse. This is what I shared. So I mentioned 4 abuses in different areas: on content, on infrastructure, on DNS, and within ICANN purview. And as you can see, the slice for within ICANN purview is very, very small. I want to make sure. In the future, I will update my slides to look like this so that it makes it clearer. I just realized that was the issue. But so I actually agree that registries and registrars are, especially registrars in their function for registering domain names and supporting the domain name registration, that slice of DNS abuse and slice what that within ICANN purview should be very small. I guess my point is more that even there is a small slice, ICANN, there is room for developing a policy that focuses on that slice, but we have to understand that there are other abuses that we won't be able to touch, and it won't be part of the policy. And that's where ICANN can be successful, is to focus in that narrow scope. Hopefully this provides the necessary clarification. I note that my slides are not shown on the big screen. So if I can momentarily show that, it would be much more clear for other people who are there at the hybrid forum, at the physical forum. I guess that's not possible, but anyway, hopefully this clarifies the issue.
Okay, right, thank you. And second question back to Professor Muller. You've been talking about, as you foresee the situation, actually all the internet registries are suffering some great pressure for example, like taking down the content, illegal content, or probably not illegal content because the order not come from the court. It probably is abusive content. And also, for example, like RIR expand the service region from resource location to become a routing security gatekeeper. And can you share your view regarding to that kind of evolution?
I'm not sure I understood the last part of your question. You want my view about routing security, whether the RIRs would be gatekeepers for routing security? Was that it?
RIR expand, as George Michelson mentioned, we changed from 3 leg to 4 leg. And for additional leg, do you consider that requires some sort of public assessment or public consultation to get a support from general public? That's my question.
So you're still trying to add legs, Kenny. It's yeah, we're getting into insect territory here. Definitely, I think that would be a high-level policy choice that would involve that should involve widespread consultation across sectors, so that the question, it would be mostly industry people who I think would be really involved in that rather than just sort of general public. But I think that civil society organizations or academic organizations with a kind of a rights focus like IGP or maybe EFF would also be interested in the implications that a stronger role for RIRs in routing security would have for the freedom and openness of the internet. So that was one reason why I think there was a lot of controversy initially about who would be in control of RPKI certificates. It was like, do we want to centralize this in ICANN and have the big root debate again, or is each going to, do the RIRs trust ICANN? Again, I want Paul to answer that question, but he's not here. He's hiding. Do we want, because you can use that power to, and the internet service providers were very concerned about this, about whether the RIRs would suddenly gain control over their operations rather than simply being address distributors who enforced policies regarding the use and aggregation of addresses. So I'd like to hear from Michelson about that too.
You know, when a professor says that's very interesting, my heart sinks, because that's polite professor speak for, I think you walked into a trap. But putting that to one side, my sense here is that that question that Milton raises is actually a material question. The nexus between an address distribution process and a routing process is a really complicated relationship. And for the RIRs to take a step into a room that previously they were slightly outside of, it ruffled feathers. It made people sit up and think, what's going on here? So it's a delicate dance. Now, part of the problem actually goes to something I tried to say in the slides. There's a relationship between addresses and routing. And the injection of trust into routing is about who has an ability to say what should be done. And we were trying in RPKI to give operators an ability to say, I can provably show what I want done with the addresses I have been delegated. So the intention was to empower operators to independently assert their routing fate. We weren't going into this thinking we want to be the routing police, because I don't know how many different ways I could say this. We don't want to be those people. That's not our community expectation. That's not the governance direction we're receiving from our membership. We don't want the gig. But the consequence of a hierarchy in address and emergence of routing and the join between the two, it put us in the mix. And so now we do have a governance question that has to be talked about. I'd like to say that my admiration for the governance aspects of the other PKI, should have been perhaps clearer. It's the visibility. It's the transparency in the processes that ICANN uses, signing the DNSSEC route, that I think are really high value, that make me think, what are we doing to achieve a similar level of public trust in our process? And so I'm not briefed to speak to governance in the wide, and I can't speak to that very strongly. I can say that there's a technological benefit to the decision in the RIRs to have 5 separate routes, and it's that we're not mutually interdependent to make assertions about transfers. The technology basis for how we can say, yes, I can tell you that's validly here, doesn't depend on an apex body, and we can do that asynchronously. But you need to be very wary of taking a technology statement and translating it up into why something happened in policy or governance space. I don't believe that's why it happened. I think it's something that's notable as a technology drive, but I'm simply not briefed to talk to the wider policy question.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We still have around 15 minutes. I'd like to open to the floor. And please queue up in front of the mic and say your name and your affiliation before you speak. No one? Okay, please go ahead.
This is Twoway again. And the first I'd like to comment about, what is Milton asking is, I'm really having no problem about the trust anchor for the DNS, DNSSEC, and all RPKI. And, we have 2 gatekeepers, one for the DN and one for the IP. I think it's okay. It's not that, of course, you can continue arguing about a political issue, and if there is there are no trust between the ICANN and IR or whatever, but I have no problem about that. I actually have one question for Adele. Adele is, you are talking about the DNSSEC. But if you look at the George is talking about the RPKI, the George can give you a very clear picture about how the RPKI was implemented, how many percentage, and TWNIC is about 98% or whatever. Can we have similar kind of the DNSSEC distribution around the world? Is it possible we can see something about that? I think this is the first question for Adele. The second question actually for Dale and also for George. We know the DNSSEC and we know the RPKI is a trust anchor and then make sure the DN is legal and the IP is legal. But if that is from government point of view or from the company point of view or for the user point of view, the DNSSEC, even the DNSSEC is 100% implemented, the RPKI is 100% implemented. Doesn't mean we can stop the hacker. We can stop the internet attacking. You know, how far the DNSSEC and RPKI can push to minimize or at least try to reduce that kind of security internet security attack, or and if we look at the previews, most of the internet security problem, actually, to be honest, not many is because you don't have a DNSSEC, you don't have an RPKI. So that is my question for Adele and also for George.
Can I speak briefly and then leave the floor for Adiel? I will be very quick.
Okay, right, sure. Go ahead.
So when Milton talked about supply chains, he had a really, really good story because the supply chains in technology are very long. And in Taiwan, you're sitting at the apex of one of them. TSMC is now a central component of the availability of technology worldwide. And TSMC is in the unfortunate circumstance of needing to discuss with farmers in Taiwan availability of water. The entire global supply chain for chips and future technology is bound up in water availability, which, as we all know, worldwide is a central problem for the next 50 to 100 years. Countries go to war over water. So these questions, the supply chain question, and these questions, can we actually mitigate risk? It's like whack-a-mole, because you stand up and say, fine, let's re-import the chip dependency back into the mainland Europe, back into America to resolve this problem. Let's give TSMC grant money to rehome in America. Where's the silicon coming from? It's coming from two countries. What happens if you interrupt the supply chain for 9959's pure silicon? Where's the machinery coming from? It's coming from ASML or wherever in the Netherlands, out of Philips Labs. If you interrupt the supply chain because a boat's caught in the Suez, you can't get those extreme UV machines to make those chips. RPKI is the same. As we close the holes on the boundary of origination, the hackers are going to get smarter and they're going to work out how to attack on path. We haven't ended the spam problem in email by deploying DKIM. So when Milton says you're adding more legs to the insect, he kind of has a story. You can't fix these problems nailing more legs on the stool. That's not why we did it. We did it because the stool grew the leg organically. And we observed stability in one leg and stability in another leg. And we thought we better make the other legs equally strong. But adding legs, it doesn't solve the problem. That's me.
Yeah.
Before Adele, you answer. Actually, I asked the question for George and also Adele for one reason. I just try to make the Taiwan government and the company or the user understand, even you implement the DNSSEC, even you implement the RPKI broadly, doesn't really stop the security leaking, and security is much complicated than that. That's my point to asking the question. Thank you.
Okay, the mic is mute. Okay, back to Adele.
Yeah. So to touch on that last part of the question about the DNSSEC and RPKI impact on security in general, as I mentioned originally, those are one piece of a puzzle that have so much element, and they address a very specific aspect of security at certain level. If we take the DNS protocol, for instance, DNSSEC is addressing a specific element of the protocol, which is the authentication. It doesn't address encryption of the data that are going through. It doesn't address the credential management. It doesn't address several other elements that are around the DNS in general. So yes, those are specific points that are being secure, but this has to be seen in a holistic and global manner. That's why, as I mentioned as well, from ICANN, we more and more talk about DNS ecosystem security than focusing only on the DNSSEC side, because we know that other elements can impact. So back to your first question about having more statistic or having more information about how the DNSSEC is being deployed, both from the signing side and from the validation side. There are efforts here and there to collect those information. For sure, I know ISOC has a map that they update regularly that shows the situation of the NSSEC signing. ICANN has, we have few initiatives as well to provide and collect more information. You may have heard about ITHI, for instance, that is collecting more information from the resolver side on validation. Now again, that shows that we want to see how far resolver are validating the signed data. That project is going to evolve to include signature at the level of TLD as well, both CC and G. We are working on another project which is DNS Observatory that will have more and more data to give a very precise information about the status of DNSSEC, both signing and validation at country level, regional level, which can help, of course, country and community locally to improve. I think that is your second question. I think I missed one question, which is about the. Did I miss one question?
No, that's it. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. That's
okay,
all.
Ahmad, your turn.
Yeah, if I can, I can respond a little bit to that. I think Katrina earlier had a graph that showed HTTPS used in phishing, and I think that's very telltale, and it dovetails into what Twoway is saying. Even if we do have the DNSSEC and RPKI deployed, we cannot route out these bad actors. However, I think the question that we actually, the right question to ask is, with DNSSEC and RPKI, we can better trust the good players, right? I mean, we can know for sure this is the guy we're connecting to. So that part of the component is equally important in my mind, because in the last, to me, in the last 30 years or so, the general feeling is that the more people connect, the less technically sophisticated they are. I think that corner is turning. The younger generation is becoming more and more technically sophisticated, and they need the information. Yes, they need what DNSSEC actually does. So when they validate it, what does it mean, and what RPKI really does. It does not make you safer online, but it does make, for example, your software update, for example, it does make software update more secure, because you can trust that domain and trust that IP. So it only adds a little bit, but I still think it's worth the effort. That's I guess from my view.
Okay, thank you, Edmund. Okay, we still have very marginal time. 3 to 4 minutes. Welcome to second question. And if you did ask the question, please remain the opportunity to someone else.
No, I just don't agree with Ahmad say. Even you implement the DNSSEC, even you implement the RPKI, that doesn't guarantee that is a good player on the internet. You know, the people who implement PKI and implement the DNSSEC or, you know, whatever, they still can be a bad player. We know that. In the neighbor of your Hong Kong territory, you know that.
Okay, it's not a question. It's just a comment. Anyway. Okay, any other question from the floor? No other question? Okay. Anything you want to add for all the panelists for final word? I think everyone give a final word for 1 minute, starting from Adele.
Yeah, my final word will obviously start from the fact that, you know, securing the internet is not a task of one actor. It's not a task of turning on just one button and it works. It's a combination of several touching points, and we see that, and we will continue to see that from different angles, the NSEC, RPKI, and various other way of hardening the different components of what make the internet infrastructure. I will also conclude by saying that from ICANN perspective, even though ICANN is not heavily involved in the operation of the DNS in general, we are more and more getting resources to be able to monitor what is going on the ground in order to better inform the way we do our outreach in the area of, you know, running a secure and stable internet identifier in general, but also informing the community when it comes to policy making, when it comes to the direction they want ICANN to go. So you will see several initiatives like DAR, which is a little bit tied to, you know, DNS abuse, that provide information on what is observed on abuse in general, which is a tool that I think more and more the domain name industry is appreciating because it gives them information. I talk about ITHI. There is a new other initiative like Kindness, which is promoting best practices on DNS ecosystem security as well, to help in this complex task that we have to secure the DNS, but the global internet identifier system in general.
Thank you. Ahmad, your second.
Yeah, building on what Adil just said, I think these challenges to the DNS and the internet infrastructure in general is not something that isolated we can deal with. And following from, I guess, this morning, the two keynote speech this morning, we also shouldn't continue, you know, increasingly try to depend on national legislation and purely industry norms that are being forced on, and really try to develop the multi-stakeholder approach. And in my view, the multi-stakeholder approach is important. And for ICANN, since we're in an ICANN forum, for ICANN, it's very important to really identify that narrow scope and allow the multi-stakeholder approach to be an exemplary deployment of that. And especially on that point, when we deal with these cross-border security issues, the multi-stakeholder approach needs to be enhanced. The democraticness of it and the effectiveness of it is also under challenge, and that's also aspects and elements that this community needs to think through.
Thank you, George.
So this governance discussion, it's an interesting dance, isn't it, between different structural forms of engagement. We have GTLDs, we have CCTLDs, we have ICANN, we have the RIR system, we have advocacy and public policy discussions, academics, tech. It's a great dance. I value this dance a lot. I think we have to keep doing this stuff. I think the idea of brittleness and the introduction of complexity and the way that then goes to the stability of service, that's a serious question we have to think about. So security is generally adding things, and risk around security additions goes to the question, did you do too much and did you make something fragile trying to protect it? We have to think about that stuff. And the way we think about it is by keeping up the dance. So keep dancing.
Okay, keep dancing. Professor Muller.
Well, I hate to sound like Johnny One Note here, but I do think that the biggest problem with cybersecurity now is the intrusion of nation states, tech nationalism, and those kinds of initiatives. And it's very good that we have this community of multi-stakeholder institutions where we are solving problems, or at least not solving them, but mitigating them and dealing with them in a fairly rational and calm way. But we have to face the fact that, the people who are allegedly protecting us from threats are frequently the biggest causes of the threats, the nation-state rivalry. The SolarWinds may have been the Russians, it might have been the Chinese trying to spy on the Americans, and the Americans are doing all kinds of things to these other countries. We are, the Europeans are trying to assert digital sovereignty. We have extremely nationalistic tendencies in certain African and Latin American countries, data localization and so on, all in the name of security. I think it's kind of normally I deal with those kinds of issues, and it's kind of a relief to come back into this environment, which is more focused and more multi-stakeholder. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you, Professor Muller. Katrina, you're the last one.
Yes, exactly. I'm the last one, and it's really difficult to be the last one when so many good things I agree with have been said. Well, yeah, I absolutely agree. Sometimes solutions that are proposed are worse than a problem itself. I love the internet, so let's not break it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all. Before I adjourn the meeting, I please everyone give a big hand to all panelists, and also thank you for all your participation. Okay, thank you for your participation. This session is finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huang, for moderating the session, and a big thank you to all panelists for a very animated panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now break for lunch. The afternoon session will start at 1:45. There will be 2 parallel tracks this afternoon. Track 1 on policy will be held here at Banquet Hall 1, while track 2 on technical aspects will be held at Banquet Hall 3. Please be back by 1:45. Thank you very much. See you after lunch.